Part 2. The Rise to Power. Chapter 6. The Plutocrat.
The rich will strive to establish their dominion and enslave the rest. They always did, they always will. They will have the same effect here as elsewhere, if we do not, by such a government, keep them within their proper spheres. We should remember that the people never act from reason alone. The rich will take the advantage of their passions and make these the instruments for oppressing them. The result of the contest will be a violent aristocracy, or a more violent despotism.
Governor Morris, delegate from New York. Federal Convention of 1787. The Federal Reserve System was hatched by members of the Pilgrim Society, who believed that a new central bank in the United States could be joined to the Bank of England to forge in iron an Anglo-American alliance that would be almost impossible to dissolve. Such a bank became the primary focus of the Pilgrims' attention when they gathered to meet each month in London and New York. America's first central bank. The establishment of a centralized bank in the United States would be met, as the Pilgrims well knew, with formidable resistance. After the Revolutionary War, Alexander Hamilton became an agent for the Rothschilds. His association with the prominent Jewish banking family most likely began when he joined forces with Robert Morris, a member of the Continental Congress, to establish the Bank of North America. Modeled after the Bank of England, the bank, which was chartered in 1781, was authorized to issue paper promissory notes that became the new nation's currency. From the start, the Bank of North America was riddled with fraud. Unable to secure the requisite $400,000 for the initial subscription of bank-up funds, Morris used his political influence to secure the gold that had been lent to the United States from France and to deposit it in the bank. With these funds as fractional reserve, he created millions of dollars in paper money, then known as scrip, which he lent to himself and his associates. The inflated notes, which Morris and Hamilton would not redeem for gold, quickly became subjected to depreciation. The bank lost its charter and was forced to close after a year of operation. The Rothschild Factor. During the Revolutionary War, the Rothschilds secured a firm footing in the United States. Nathaniel M. Rothschild, in addition to his banking business, operated a textile mill in Manchester, England, and purchased cotton from American farmers in Virginia, North and South Carolina, and Georgia. Along with his brother Amschel, Nathan provided loans to various state governments and loans to England for the hiring of German mercenaries. The agents of the Rothschilds were omnipresent throughout colonial America and assisted Hamilton in establishing the Bank of North America. Upon becoming America's first Secretary of the Treasury, Hamilton relied on the Rothschilds to establish the Bank of the United States, the country's second central bank. This new creation was modeled after the Bank of England, which remained solely in the control of the House of Rothschild. The purpose of the Bank of the United States was to provide the federal government a steady supply of loans. The government, in turn, would pledge that the notes they received from the new central bank were valid for payments to the United States. Fractional reserves. Like the Bank of England, the Bank of the United States regulated America's currency by the process of printing or burning the paper money. It could increase the money supply to produce prosperity or decrease the supply to cause recession. These manipulations were based on the distinction between money and goods. Goods were the real wealth that a person possessed, while money remained only a person's claim on the wealth that was being retained by someone or something, i.e., a bank, else. Goods were tangible assets, while money represented a statement of the debt that was owed to the holder. The use of money rather than goods as payment for a transaction dated back to the creation of the Bank of England by William Paterson, a retired pirate, in 1694. Paterson alleviated his customers of the burden of transferring heavy bags or chests of gold for business transactions by producing paper certificates, which entitled the bearers to exchange them for gold upon demand. Due to the convenience of paper, only a small fraction of certificate holders ever sought redemption in the precious metal. Paterson quickly realized that they only needed to keep enough gold in hand to cover the fraction of certificates presented as payment. The rest of the gold could be used to mount a myriad of public and private ventures, including the building of ships and the waging of war. The excess volume, which rose to 90% of the paper claims against reserves, became known as banknotes. An economic miracle had been performed. The issuance of paper claims greater than the gold at hand meant that the Bank of England was creating most of its money out of nothing. This practice, known as fractional reserves, became adopted by the Rothschilds, who took over the Bank of England and the other central banks in existence at the time of the creation of the Bank of the United States: Swedish Riksbank, Banco de España, Banque de France, Bank of Finland, De Nederlandse Bank, Norges Bank, Oostenrijkse National Bank, Danmarks National Bank, Banco de Portugal, National Bank of Belgium, Bank of Indonesia, German Reichsbank, Bulgarian National Bank, National Bank of Romania, Bank of Japan, and the National Bank of Serbia. America's second national bank. The Bank of the United States was not established without formidable opposition. Thomas Jefferson pointed out that the creation of such an economic animal was unconstitutional. Only Congress, Jefferson argued, possessed the right to manufacture and control the nation's currency.
To take a single step beyond the boundaries thus specially drawn around the power of Congress, he said, is to take possession of a boundless field of power, no longer susceptible of any definition.
After a year of debate, Hamilton's views prevailed, and in 1791, Congress granted a 20-year charter to the new central bank. The Bank of the United States was capitalized at $10 million. $8 million came from private investors, including the Rothschilds, and $2 million came from the federal government. The latter investment was deemed necessary to safeguard the country's interest and to ensure that the new central bank was not used for personal gain. As soon as it was established in Philadelphia, the Bank of the United States opened branches in Baltimore, Boston, Charleston, and New York. The birth of big government. In accordance with Hamilton's plans, the new central bank instituted a federal tax system to further the nation's debt. This was essential since the shareholders of the Bank of the United States obtained interest from the government at the rate of 6% for every dollar it produced. With its ability to secure unlimited loans, the federal government grew by leaps and bounds, with enough revenue to sustain a standing army and navy and to create a bureaucracy. This, too, took place according to the blueprint. Hamilton believed the Republican government would evolve within a matter of decades into a fiscal military state. By means of this evolution, America would become increasingly less egalitarian as it matured and more monarchical. The final result would be the creation of a plutocracy, a group of elite bankers who would rule the country. But in order to take place, the creators of the new central bank would have to gain complete control of its operations without any interference from the government or any elected official. The delights of debt. By 1796, the Bank of the United States had shelled out $68.2 million to the federal government so that it could go on a spending spree and fall into insurmountable debt. In tandem with this development, the prices on consumer goods increased by 72%. Now, the directors of the central bank demanded a payment of 1/3 of its loans, knowing that the government would be unable to come up with the necessary cash. The only solution to this situation was for the government to sell its share of the bank. While Jefferson and other opponents of the bank watched in horror, the Bank of the United States became 100% privately owned, and most of the shares were in the hands of the Rothschilds and their associates. Through the first decade of the 19th century, inflation continued to ravage the country because of the central banks churning out of paper dollars as quickly as the government could swallow them. By 1811, when the charter for the bank was up for renewal, the American people had lost 42% of the value of their money due to the unchecked rise in prices for goods and services. The only individuals profiting from this development were the bank shareholders, who received interest on every dollar that their institution made out of nothing. By design, the rampant inflation had little effect on the wealthy who possessed tangible assets. The plutocracy Hamilton envisioned for America was coming to fruition at an alarming rate. The battle lines. By 1811, when the charter for the Bank of the United States came up for renewal, the battle lines were sharply drawn between those who supported the bank and those who sought its demise. When the dust of the battle settled, the charter for renewal had been defeated by one vote in the House of Representatives and one vote in the Senate. The central bank was forced to close its doors on January 24, 1811. Jefferson uttered a sigh of relief, not knowing that the creature that had been created by Hamilton and the Rothschilds was far from dead.